Anthropics put out a lot of interesting stuff. They had a vending machine in the office, which was fully agentic, fully automated, and basically doing everything from the ordering of drinks to the logistics of getting them shipped in. And even a simple use case like this went rogue very quickly. But for us, the biggest thing we're trying to do at the moment is actually AI spec-driven development. So the idea is that a single project manager, an idea could effectively utilize AI to build out a product from specifications to design to deployment and then running that lifecycle. And this is one of the biggest areas we as a security team are now trying to support. And I actually like to break this down into the very simple security core concepts of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And this is where we actually start to see the trade-offs with AI.
Welcome to the season 5 of the Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host and AppSec enthusiast and growth and community manager at Escape. Today, I'm joined by Jason Fernandes, VP of Security and Privacy at Mercari, the Japanese-born global marketplace now spanning e-commerce, fintech, and crypto. It is this rare combination that puts him at the intersection of some of the strictest regulatory environments in tech. He oversees everything from product and platform security to threat detection, privacy, and AI security and AI governance. In this episode, we talked about the challenges of AI governance, the Lethal Trifecta for AI agents, the confused deputy problem, and how to justify AI security investments to the leadership. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes. With that, get ready for Jason's opinions. Dive right in.
Hi, Jason. I'm super excited to have you on the Elephant in AppSec podcast this season. It's actually my first guest who's based in Japan. I'm very excited about that as well, kind of learn more about your experience. And I think you have very extensive experience in security, well, now in security and privacy as well, which are topics we've definitely discussed on the podcast too. And I think embrace cloud native solutions too, because I looked at your LinkedIn, it's something you mentioned quite a lot. So, and I think, it's something that's very interesting overall for listeners to like, how do we actually security across the environments and taking into account all the, modern technologies that basically appear, now every month. So on your side, what was the most difficult part of like scale and security while ensuring the development speed in this still, I would say, scale up environment without slowing everyone down?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Alexandra. I'm happy to be on the podcast. Yeah, I think just to give a brief introduction of myself, and then I can dive into that as well. I'm Jason. I'm VP of Security and Privacy at Mercari. I'm looking over the security engineering functions, so product security, platform security, enterprise security, and as of April this year, AI security, which we've created as a virtual team, as well as teams like threat detection and response, which are kind of our SOC CISA kind of team. I'm also looking over the non-technical teams, so things like security assurance, privacy, regulatory side of that, and also as of October of last year, looking over AI governance as well. As you mentioned, Mercari, I've done a few presentations on this before about Mercari being more of a kind of cloud native company. Actually, think I don't want to date the video. Tomorrow is actually Mercari's 13th anniversary as a company, so it's still a very, very
congratulations
young
on the
company.
13th of February.
Yeah, so you've caught me on the day before the party, so I'm still very awake at the very least. But yeah, it's still a very young company which has grown up with the benefits of having the ability to work with cloud native solutions from the very beginning. I think that's allowed us to build in security controls which are much more aligned with the development lifecycle in general from the very start. So we're dealing with modern infrastructure. The entire application is started mostly on the cloud without having to have a lot of the services in data centers, although it did have a few of the services originally on data centers as well. And just having that spurt of growth as we had our IPO, I think almost 7 or 8 years ago now, being able to then use that initiative to build out a full platform team who can build scalable applications. A lot of Mercari is running on a GKE on Google Kubernetes engine, which
Mm-hmm.
allows us to leverage the controls built into a managed cloud platform as well and utilize things like runtime security, for example, using Falco as an open source solution for that.
Mm-hmm.
And having a platform team who's built a very modern CI/CD pipeline, which we're able to leverage, putting in SAST, SCA, to some extent DAS solutions as well into this
Mm-hmm.
pipeline. So I think this has provided us a broad level of coverage. And yeah, as you mentioned, and I think that's probably going to be one of the larger topics of the podcast today, now dealing with AI and how that's speeding this up even further, as we're not just dealing with a very, very rapid level of iteration from developers, but also an increased need or an increased want to be able to provide agentic workflows within that and provide AI agents with more ability to directly contribute to the development lifecycle itself as well.
I think it's very interesting what you said that it's platform, correct me if I'm wrong, but that it's platform team that actually implemented the scanners in the development pipeline, because quite often what you see, it's like more product security or application security teams that cover that part.
Oh, yes, so I've probably not explained that very well, but the platform team builds out the platform itself. We
Okay.
have obviously within that a network focused team, CI/CD focused team, recently more teams like platform enablement, FinOps, and particularly recently AI enablement, who we work with very closely.
Okay.
But our team it's still a very flat organization. I'd say our team is very well integrated with them. So whilst we are deploying these solutions, we are having to work very closely with them to make sure that it fits well into the pipeline, that we're able to integrate security solutions in a way that they're actually effective and that developers are able to work on them. I still think there's challenges in doing that. I don't think there are many
Yeah.
companies which have really, really built a vulnerability management in a truly seamless way into developer workflows, but it's definitely something we're working on. And I think for us, having that advantage of having built out a platform team, having more modern infrastructure to work with, it's an area where we have a lot of ideas we can play around with.
What do you think is the biggest challenge? I haven't seen indeed, at least for the conversations, a lot of teams that perfected it, but I know about different ways and that people, that engineers implemented it. Like, what is the biggest challenge for you?
Yeah, so I think looking at the case of Mercari, one of the biggest challenges is actually the breadth of industries that we cover. So I think a lot of other companies, they'll only have one product they focus on in general. For example, if it's Netflix, they're focusing on the video distribution part of that platform. I think for us, one of the challenges we have is still a relatively small company in size, but we're covering an e-commerce marketplace. We're covering FinTech. We're covering crypto assets within that as well. And with that, you have three very different business models with very different compliance and regulatory requirements. So I think communicating that to the developers across the organization and having particularly to deal with fintech regulation where the controls are not always easy to put in a seamless way, especially if you go 100% by how they're written in the regulation itself. Finding ways to communicate, find middle ground, and gain understanding on controls which may introduce some level of friction to developers. Understanding there are areas where we won't always be able to get a full level of understanding, but being able to explain the reasons behind needing to implement something which introduces friction. And then also trying to find ways that we can isolate parts of the business which shouldn't be subject to those stricter controls so that they can run with a little bit more speed. If that is a control which does not improve security for the whole, and it's purely a control that's there for a regulatory purpose, I think there are areas where we are trying to be able to isolate less regulated businesses more. But yeah, it's challenging with how application is set up because it's this conglomerate of multiple different businesses, including fintech. So yeah, I've gone a few different angles there, but I guess to wrap that up, ensuring a very strong level of security across all of the businesses that we have, being able to meet very strict compliance and regulatory requirements, but also for the lesser regulated businesses, not inflicting unnecessary levels of friction for less effective controls. on them as well.
Yeah, I think like finding that right balance between the controls, regulations, and it's something that's super hard. And especially like when it comes to AI. So I think there were a lot of arguments, about like where is it too much regulation in AI could kill innovation, or like not enough, governance will actually make it, go rogue. Especially I think between like worldwide, there are definitely different views on that as well. Like let's say I'm based in Europe, like regulation is something that's like everyone is obsessed with. And again, big topic. Well, let's say in the US, it's something on the opposite side of spectrum. It's very hard to find the right balance. It is something you mentioned on your side. You've started to tackle like the AI governance part since the last October. How have, for example, you approached that? How can you create secure playground, as we can call it, for teams to experiment with it?
Yeah, I do think it's very challenging. I think going up to last year, there wasn't so much in the way of regulation, super strict regulation for AI. I think it's even more kind of going towards a direction of the regulation being loosened in many ways. But as we've gotten into this year, I think we're starting to see some more strict requirements come out. One of the reasons for us to build the AI governance team was, whilst we are an organization who's trying to experiment a lot with AI, and they've put out this AI native direction as a company. I think most companies are going in this, direction, explaining how they're trying to get 100% of code commits to be, 100% of developers to be using AI in their contribution to the product, to have 100% of employees using AI in some way in their everyday workflows. But for us, being able to explain that we're doing this in a responsible, safe, and secure way. So a lot of that is being able to inventory what we're doing, being able to explain that there's a reason behind having certain workflows, being able to explain there are controls around workflows. I think right now, the definition of AI is incredibly broad. So a lot of what's being used is just very simple chatbots like OpenAI, Gemini, Anthropic's, Claude as well, and generally code generation as well. It's starting to get broader, and I think going into this year, things are getting a lot more agentic. And there's a push at companies to make this more agentic, because a chatbot in itself or just simple code generation doesn't really provide the levels of productivity or that kind of dream that everybody has of workflows becoming 100% autonomous or being able to potentially remove the need for people in some areas. So that's where I think this really needs to step up. And there's a few different risks we have to think about here. So I think one of the challenges we have is, as we start to look at more agentic and more autonomous workflows, to what extent can we provide access to internal systems? And I think at the moment, it's quite limited in what we actually want to be able to provide to something which is fully agentic in terms of what it's doing. So there's a few different ideas, a few different models around this. I think one of the models we're looking at the most on our side is actually the Lethal Trifecta. And this was put out by a guy called Simon Wilson on his blog as well. You can check that out. I think it's a great basis for any team to use to have fundamentals, what they're looking at risk-wise. That's basically breaking this down into three ideas, which is AI shouldn't have access to both private data, external communications, and untrusted input at the same time. And at most, it should have access to two of these. And then agentic workflow should be as granular as possible. And you should be splitting it so that each granular part of the workflow only has access to two parts of this at once. So we've started to use this as a model at Mercari. Meta's put out an incredible article on this, which we reference a lot as well, calling this the rule of two, where you're only selecting two of those at any point. And this is kind of the base for us as we look at agentic workflows. And to be completely honest with you, I don't think we have anything which I would call a 100% agentic workflow yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there are very few companies, except those who are really, really on the edge of the research here. I think even Anthropic's put out a lot of interesting stuff research-wise. For example, they had a vending machine in the office, which was fully agentic, fully automated, and basically doing everything from the ordering of drinks to the logistics of getting them shipped in. And even a simple use case like this went rogue very quickly. But for us, the biggest thing we're trying to do at the moment is actually it's AI spec-driven development, so ASDD. So we actually have a project internally called PJ Double. And the goal of PJ Double is in the name. It's effectively there to double productivity by having an AI agent which does everything from the very beginning to the end of the development lifecycle. So the idea is that a single project manager with an idea could effectively utilize AI to build out a product from specifications to design to deployment and then running that lifecycle. And this is one of the biggest areas we as a security team are now trying to support, because to do this, there's a lot of different areas you need to take into account. And I actually like to break this down into the very simple security core concepts of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And this is where we actually start to see the trade-offs with AI, because we're obviously, as most security teams are, very focused on preventing the leakage of sensitive information. I think that's the core task of pretty much any security team. Most security teams would say that's their mission. But when you're implementing agentic workflows, to make them useful, you actually need to provide as much information as you possibly can to make a useful agent. But that's fundamentally going against the principle of confidentiality if you're providing a very broad set of information. So that goes back to what I was saying about creating granular workflows, where certain parts of the workflow only have access to certain parts of information at a time so that you can limit that risk, or being able to limit certain agents to only have access to specific systems to perform a certain part of a task before handing off to another agent to do that with another system to complete the second part of the task. So whilst a lot of this is still under consideration, design on our side, I think these are the things we need to look at. Integrity, and please stop me if I'm rambling on this as well.
Yeah,
But,
I think because I have a question, like I think the key question is like how do you the borders of these workflows? I think for every
yeah.
organization it's going to be quite different, or do you think there is actually like ways to structure the definition of those borders where the data can come in and where data can like come out?
So I think it's really going to depend on the organizations. What systems do they need to connect to get specifications or generate specifications? How are they then going to take a specification to create a design doc? Does that use the same system or another system? And then how is that going to be linked to a pipeline to generate code and then deploy that code for a CI/CD pipeline? The way I look at this is each AI agent is effectively going to be its own worker and have its own job role. So a lot of the talk around AI governance is that eventually AI needs to be managed as a separate identity. And in that way, AI is going to need some kind of context as to what its job is. One of the things we've been playing around with recently is actually Google's model for, I need to check the name of the model. It was Google's model for internal fraud detection. And sorry, it's jumped from my brain for a second there. Facade is the name of the model. So one of the things Facade does is it actually looks at a profile of an employee and what they would be doing in their everyday work to identify what is behavior which is out of scope of their normal activity, which would flag that it's potentially internal fraud or some kind of malicious internal threat. Now, when you have an AI agent, how can you define what the context of that agent's behavior is? It might not be like a typical employee. It might be, is it going to get out of bed early? Is it going to get out of bed late? Does it have a specific behavioral pattern? Does it only do one thing or does it not? So similar to how you have a breakdown between an accounting team and a treasury team, and they have two separations of duties in the work that they're doing, I think AI agents are going to have to actually follow similar concepts to humans in this way, where a part of the agent or separate multiple agents are split across these roles and have some level of separation of duties to be able to define what they have access to and ensuring that access is within a reasonable bounds, which reduces the risk associated with a single workflow.
It's super interesting because I think in any security topic, what comes up is context. And actually, this is like the problem that is very hard to solve just with AI. And maybe that's one of the reasons why we don't have full autonomous workflows yet, because the context is so much different and you have to tune in it so much depending on your environment. Do you think we'll ever solve this context problem to actually fully automate it with maybe AGI? I don't know.
So yeah, this is interesting. I think it goes, so I think the conflict is context and confidentiality. So that's kind of the first point I was touching on there. You're going to encounter one or two approaches to this. So I think one is you have the super agent, which has access to everything, has all of the context, but as a result is incredibly risky because of what it can do. Or that's going to be split into multiple agents, multiple identities, which have a limited context, a limited scope of what they can do, which means the single impact of that agent being compromised is lessened, but you actually have a similar cost that you have with humans, where the two agents are going to have to communicate their context across with each other. So
Yeah.
I think in our going back to the pattern of like an accounting and a treasury agent, the accounting agent is going to do all the accounting stuff, but there's going to be a stage where it has to pass its context on to a treasury agent, which then takes that and does different work with different scopes and different levels of access to certain systems. So I think breaking that part down, having those kind of authentication, authorization, auditing, and accountability layers are going to be key to ensuring that AI is actually able to do these workflows in a similar accountable way to which humans do, where you can ensure the integrity of the workflows and the transactions that they're conducting.
Okay. And when you come to availability part, because I think for you, the availability part, it's something that's super important in general for Mercari's business.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the availability part. I mean, I think you said you looked at some of the slides I'd done at an event earlier.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I kind of forced the availability part on the end. But I think the availability part, not necessarily so important for Mercari. Obviously, as a service, our availability is very important and similar to other large-scale e-commerce platforms, availability is incredibly important, and losing that can lead to significant monetary losses for the business. But in the context of AI, I actually think availability comes down to the usage of tokens versus the usefulness of the tokens. So for a lot of the potential AI features we've considered putting out internally, I think there's always a question of how much is this going to cost hitting a certain AI provider's API to do that versus whether or not that actually has some kind of meaningful customer impact. Is it going to lead to increased customer satisfaction? Is it going to lead to increases in average order value, AOV, or things like this? I think this is one of the interesting areas for current AI use cases. And I think personally, right now, many companies are very focused on the idea of improving productivity with AI. But productivity, I think, is an incredibly complicated concept. So if you're a factory producing sushi rolls and you've got a very high demand for it, I think the more sushi rolls you can put out, the faster to meet that demand, the better that business is going to go. But if you're developing software with very nuanced features, being able to put out features faster doesn't necessarily always lead to better business outcomes, in my opinion. So I think we're going to reach some level of diminishing returns where agentic AI is able to facilitate faster development or faster internal processes, but eventually those processes are going to reach a point in the curve where there's diminishing returns on where those productivity increases actually lead to some kind of additional business value in what the AI agent is able to provide there.
I think it's very interesting, like the concept of diminishing returns, because it's also kind of, in a sense, the increase in productivity has to be also measured in a dollar value. And I think, like, I know a lot of my listeners are also sometimes struggling, especially those on junior side. They are struggling with or asking questions like what is the best way to justify, return on investment to the leadership of their initiatives, where AI governance, whether it's adding, AI to actually improve the security, the development workflow, or let's say if you buy AI-powered tool, how do you justify it for AI-powered security tool to the leadership and to the development team? And I think you're also like your position is a bit on a sweet spot of like also being able to understand how communicate this value to the leadership. If it would be this, advice that you could give someone who is like, let's say, building the AI governance security program, or even like maybe implementing, agents in their workflows, how would you help them to justify it to their leadership and their organization?
Yeah, I think return on investment is very challenging for the reasons I've described, because as I mentioned, pure
Yeah.
productivity can often have diminishing returns, and it's often hard to link productivity to real business outcomes. Anyone can come up with stories or ways to explain numbers in those ways, I feel. I think AI governance on that side is in a very unique position because we're not necessarily driving the business forward. We're trying to ensure that the utilization of AI is done in a safe, secure way. And whilst this is somewhat part of a new scope that I'm looking into in the AI governance side now, we're working much more closely with FinOps and other teams to ensure that the IT governance part of AI governance is also there, and that utilization of AI at the company is actually leading to some kind of useful business outcome, that it's not just pure utilization of AI for the sake of using AI. And I think that's a really important concept going into 2026 as well. How can you ensure that the utilization of AI at your company is not for low diminishing return productivity gains, but is actually linked to some kind of broader business strategy or outcome, which leads to a better product or better features for your customers and ultimately better outcomes for the business as well. And so being focused on that side, I think our job right now, I think even in 2026, we're still in a very experimental stage. So our goal is to make it possible to experiment with as many new kinds of technology as agentic AI, generative AI continues to evolve in a safe and secure and responsible, and more importantly, able to explain from an accountability point of view way as possible. And from that experimentation, I think we're eventually going to find winners and losers, products and solutions that we want to continue using into the future, experiments we've tried out which didn't work out because it didn't meet strategic business goals or outcomes. And yeah, those which really did bring significant, meaningful impact and that we keep going on with into the future. So yeah, I think right now, most companies are still in that experimental phase. And as we continue into 2026, it's going to probably get tighter in terms of IT governance and considering where agentic AI actually fits into broader business goals and strategy as well.
Yeah, I think using AI in a safe and secure way is such a also philosophical question. How do we do it? Because like right now, for example, I'm reading a book about like Empire of AI, how OpenAI got started. I don't know if you've read it, but it's about like a story of Sam Altman and like how initially he was actually passionate. I found out about AI and security. But now the story has changed and has been changing since like the moment they thought about it, and Elon Musk, and then like it's just Sam that's left, and how like the whole attitude and now with ads potentially in ChatGPT, how it changed. And it's going to be very interesting to see how many companies I feel like adapt this safe and secure approach, and even like how many AI companies will actually adapt this approach as well. I think actually maybe Anthropic is the one that focusing definitely it feels more on security now. Since you mentioned 2026, so each time on the podcast I ask a question at the end, like, and actually this season's question is, what do you think in 2026 will be the buzzword that will drive kind of the most attention?
That's a very tricky question. I'll follow on from your first comment as I'm trying to think of a good answer to that. Things are always evolving and changing, so I think having to maintain a flexible, adaptive approach is always going to be something that security teams are going to have to do. How do we enable new technologies? And then what safe, secure, responsible, reliable means has many different colors, and you can do everything from 10% to 100% there. Depending on the risk appetite of a company and a team. So that's always going to have a very different level, a different scale across different companies. I think pulling that into the buzzword as well, I would probably say adaptive AI on top of agentic AI. So how does AI adapt to new workflows, changes in environments or systems to be able to do new things? Does AI adapt when it encounters, for example, untrusted data? I think that's part of that as well. So whilst we have agentic AI, I think we need to move to more role-based agents, and within role-based agents, adaptive agents who work within certain bounds, but similar to human beings, still have some level of adaptivity within what they're able to do.
Very interesting. And I just got actually a question that I wanted to ask before we finish the episode. Since you mentioned you work with a lot of different teams within the company to make sure that it's properly set up, like you mentioned, FinOps, for example, that you started to work with. And I know you've been working also before, like on security champions program, something that's been done also personally. Is it like how do you actually in those teams that are not maybe related to development, do you have any security champions in place that could help you with AI governance?
So yes, we do have a security champions program in place. As we've gotten more into AI security, we've held sessions on AI security. whilst we don't have security champions positioned in every single team at the moment, we're actually running an effort to get this started up again. Before, I think in 2019 or 2020, we had one in each team. But as you can imagine, with a company scaling and teams changing around, this became difficult to maintain at some point. We're actually in the process of reinstalling security champions across all the teams at the moment. So I think they can support on this side as well, helping proliferate best practices, helping us explain what kind of issues we're seeing or what kind of issues we want to prevent across projects and products. I think probably the best thing we've done on that side is actually establishing the AI security team. And as you mentioned, we're working with other teams across the company. I think we're incredibly fortunate that we have an AI enablement team at the company. And we also have this central AI task force. So because we have these two teams driving the AI direction and that kind of thought process and philosophy across the company, we're able to utilize this to incorporate security into the greater direction, kind of the culture change that these executive endorsed teams are pushing. Having security integrated into those broader strategic initiatives, I think is perhaps more effective than having security as its own silo, trying to push things independently. And I think we've seen a lot of success in collaboration and doing things that way. So yeah, I think I would recommend Hiroki in our AI security team's blog for this. I think it got a lot of traction on LinkedIn. So everything from core AI security frameworks we've seen coming out, MCP security, particularly one of the issues we've been focused on is the confused deputy problem, the breakdown of that authorization layer and agents being able to access layers of information they shouldn't. The lethal trifecta, agent rule of two, which I mentioned earlier from Simon Wilson and Meta on that side, and just general things about building your own independent AI security agents. I think the thing we covered probably the best is, whilst we haven't had a significant incident as a result of AI yet, obviously as you're experimenting with these tools, we see things where people have made misconfigurations or close calls where someone's connected something potentially to a system where we think, we need to take a step back and not have AI agents accessing such systems. So sharing openly within the company cases where we, as a security team, have felt that there should be different requirements in place, or that something could have led to an incident if we hadn't stepped in. Being able to share this stuff very openly within the company has helped us prevent the reoccurrence of those kind of cases and to be able to explain best practices across the company as well.
It's very interesting. Actually, like confused deputy problem. There was a talk on that in the Elephant and AppSec conference that I organized in January. So I think most of listeners on the podcast didn't know what it is from security perspective as well. But yeah, very interesting. I'm looking forward to all the links of the resources that you mentioned. I'll definitely put them in the description of the podcast. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for coming on the show. It was great learning experience for me. I've learned I think that's also the goal for the audience, that I think it's challenging topic for everyone, and it's great to hear how everyone approaches that and can learn from each experiences. So thanks again so much for coming on the show.
All right. Thank you very much for having me on the show, and I'll be happy to share, especially Hiroki in my team's blog. I got to say, he's done a ton of great work for AI security for us, so I'm happy to share those all out, and thank you for having me on the show again.